What's up, everyone? Welcome to Built Bruns and Dragons. I'm your host, Built Brun Bafflestone. So today we're having another episode of my deep dive series. Today looking at the offensive approach versus the defensive approach, or as I often like to put it, offensive mindedness versus defensive mindedness. So this touches on a theme that goes all the way back to my original starting series for this channel, The 7 Tactical Aspects of Combat, where I mentioned that I personally, as a gamer and an athlete, have always been defensive oriented. My focus and priority is to absolutely shut down my opponent in a game or on the basketball court or, whatever sport or game I happen to be playing. And whatever offense I happen to generate is, a bonus. It develops organically and situationally, whereas I really, really try hard on defense. And I carry this philosophy into Dungeons & Dragons. But as I also noted way back then, most people are offensive-minded. Just, they have a natural preference for offense and not so much for defense. And whereas my motto has always been the famous sports adage that offense sells tickets and defense wins championships, the offensive-minded have a different motto, which is that the best defense is a good offense. And of course, since I'm an optimizer and I, interact with the optimizer community, I tend to get into a lot of arguments about this. I mean, I wouldn't say a lot of arguments, but plenty of people have voiced a preference for the offensive philosophy and, focus on burst damage and generating a certain amount of damage that's in excess of the hit point total of any creature of XCR. And, it's all about stacking attacks and damage bonuses and getting advantage and, getting criticals and things like that. And so I've been playing in this Westmarch server now for a month and a half, played like 20 different games, and have had a chance to see how other people put their builds together and how they perform on the field. And the first thing I should say is that I'm like the only defensive-minded player out there that I've seen pretty much. I guess unless you count like dedicated healing and such, but that's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, defensive-minded players that really prioritize not getting hurt. Most people are about doing damage. As an aside, I'm a little bit surprised that I've seen so few wizards at this Westmarch server, and I've literally played with one guy who's a controller, a friend of mine who is also playing a warlock, a Meridlock, and he uses, Sleet Storm and Hypnotic Pattern. I haven't seen any other controllers. Anyways, it's kind of an aside, but I thought that was weird. But in any case, I've seen a lot of builds that I wouldn't say are optimized, and the optimized builds that I've seen that are offensive oriented. I have to say, so I believe that what I've seen vindicates the defensive-oriented philosophy. I've been extremely successful. I have had a huge impact on most of my battles. I have been in control most of the time, and the times that I have taken a lot of damage and been in danger have mostly been due to piloting error, where I've just, screwed up my positioning or whatever, and not due to the approach. If I'd played it perfectly, I would have had the capability to win in almost every one of the sessions so far. And I know that my build is creating some consternation amongst the DMs. One DM straight up said that he's considering banning my build because there's just nothing he can do to hurt me or touch me. And I get the impression that there's been discussions behind the scenes amongst DMs about how to handle my build, which is fine because part of this is always about staying one step ahead and letting them fight the last war while you're dictating and setting the terms for the next war. And as I keep leveling and adding new abilities, I will be keeping on changing up my strategies and such. So, for example, I'm getting the feeling that I'm not going to be allowed to leave the map as much because that has been so effective for me in past battles. And that's fine. I've already kind of evolved past that strategy and I'm doing different things now. And by the time they start banning and nerfing that, I'll have moved on to the next thing. But that's the sort of impact that a defensive-minded strategy can have. It causes a lot of concern amongst DMs because they can't hurt you. And they understand, just like I understand, that if your opponent can't hurt you, you're going to win in the end. You don't even need great offense. As long as they can't hurt you, you've got all day. And I've seen these offensive-minded builds go into action, and I gotta say, I'm just not that impressed because no matter how great a damage they do, I've never seen them blaze down a creature in like one turn. Maybe once, but actually I even think that took 2 rounds. And what I've generally seen is that after this giant offensive burst, the creature's still there, and then it counterattacks, and then it practically destroys this character that launched its total offensive output, and then it's a huge scramble to keep this guy alive, to try and pour on enough damage to kill this giant thing, and that's just if it's like one thing. Sometimes there's like more than one thing, so even if you do blaze something down and get it to 3/4 health or whatever, what about the guy next to it? Whereas a defense, especially an ultimate defense, which is a little bit of a different category. Watch the defense video. It was number 6 of that 7 technical aspects of combat for more details. But it generally applies to everything. I mean, I throw up an ultimate defense. That means I'm generally protected from every single thing on the field based on what they can do. And, right now I've got like the biggest holes filled. Of course, I'm only 7th level, so I don't have every single hole filled, but I'm taking that approach that I outlined in that video about defense, that, hey, this is D&D. If you actually sit down and write them out, there's only so many ways you can be attacked. I call those holes, and then you start plugging those holes, and then eventually you get to the point where all of those holes are plugged. And you're prioritizing. So by the time you get to tier 2, the main holes are plugged. And as you continue to ascend, you start plugging more important ones, and leave the more esoteric ones aside. But I'm going to get to those eventually, right, as we continue to level. And I've got to say, I think that based on my experience at this Wetmarsh server, the defensive-minded approach is vindicated, and the offensive-minded approach has yet to impress me. So please let me know what you think in the comments below. I feel like this is going to be a little bit of a controversial video, but I do want to get that discussion started because I think it's interesting to talk about combat in this meta sense. And, I want to hear what you guys have to say. Regardless, thank you so much for watching. This has been Build Bronze and Dragons. I'm your host, Bill Bafflestone. See you next time.